The church bells carried over the sleepy streets of Willow Creek, each toll drawing neighbors out of their porches to watch the unlikely procession. Eleanor Hayes, 55, stepped through the tall wooden doors in lace that shimmered under the soft glow of chandeliers. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a disbelief she hadn't dared to confess even to herself. She caught her reflection in the glass near the altar lines around her eyes, silver strands peeking from her veil, but also a radiance that hadn't been there for years. For once, she felt seen. Marcus Reed stood waiting, tall and broad-shouldered, with the confidence of a man far younger than the bride he now promised forever to. His tuxedo was sleek, his grin disarming, his eyes flicking across the guests before landing on Eleanor with a warmth that made her chest tighten. As the pastor spoke, voices rippled quietly through the pews. Some whispered admiration. How brave, how beautiful. Others leaned closer to trade suspicions, wondering why a man of 30 would choose a woman 25 years his senior. Eleanor heard fragments, like glass breaking just beyond her reach. It's sweet, but odd. Maybe for money. She deserves happiness, though. She forced a smile, grounding herself in Marcus's gaze, letting the rest fade. When the pastor asked for vows, Marcus took Eleanor's hand with firm assurance. "I never expected love to find me this way," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "But when I met Eleanor, I knew my life was no longer mine alone. She makes me whole." Eleanor's throat tightened as she whispered her own. "Marcus, you've given me more joy in months than I believed I could feel again. I promise to love you with all I have, for as long as we are given." Applause filled the church as they kissed, her heart soaring against the weight of suspicion pressing from the crowd. For that moment, love drowned out the doubt. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of roses and fading leaves. Guests gathered beneath strings of lights, glasses clinking. Eleanor laughed too loudly at jokes, danced until her feet ached, and allowed herself to forget the whispers. Marcus charmed effortlessly, lifting children into the air, shaking hands, telling stories of adventures he claimed were just beginning. But not all eyes softened. At the edge of the crowd, Eleanor's son Daniel stood rigid, glass untouched in his hand. His jaw clenched whenever Marcus leaned close to Eleanor, whenever his mother tilted her head back and laughed like a girl again. He muttered under his breath, almost to himself, "Something's off with him." Eleanor, catching his glare, touched his arm. "Please, Daniel," she whispered, "just be happy for me tonight." He forced a nod, but the tightness never left his face. The night drew long. Lanterns flickered, couples swayed on the dance floor, and Eleanor leaned against Marcus's chest, soaking in the warmth she'd ached for. She ignored the prickle of unease that occasionally stirred when his smile slipped the second he turned away from her. She told herself it was exhaustion, nerves, anything but what it might truly be. As the music slowed and the last toast was made, Marcus raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he declared, voice carrying over the hush. Guests echoed him, lifting their glasses high. Eleanor's eyes glistened as she looked at him, believing every word. Daniel, silent at the corner table, stared at Marcus over the rim of his untouched drink. His eyes narrowed, dark with a warning he couldn't yet name. The night ended in celebration, but the echo of doubt lingered, a shadow waiting for the next day to dawn. The morning after the wedding, Eleanor moved through her kitchen with a glow that seemed to brighten every corner of the house. Sunlight streamed in, catching the edge of her silk robe as she hummed under her breath. Marcus leaned against the doorway, coffee in hand, watching her with a grin that looked practiced, though Eleanor was too busy basking in her new identity as his wife to notice. Daniel sat at the table, his expression carved from stone. He had arrived earlier, under the pretense of dropping off a forgotten gift, but in truth, he came to see if the unease gnawing at him would fade. It didn't. Marcus pulled out a chair across from him. "So, Daniel," he said casually, "how does it feel having a new stepfather?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Feels sudden." Eleanor's smile faltered. "Daniel," Marcus chuckled, brushing off the tension with a sip of coffee. "Life's full of surprises. Your mum and I, we just clicked. You'll see." Daniel studied him, eyes sharp. He noticed the way Marcus's wristwatch gleamed. New, expensive, something Daniel knew his mother had bought. He noticed, too, the slight impatience in Marcus's foot tapping against the tile, as though he wanted the conversation over before it began. Later, when Marcus stepped outside to take a phone call, Daniel leaned toward his mother. "Mom, do you even know who he was before all this?" Eleanor busied herself with the dishes, her cheeks flushed. "I know enough. He makes me happy, Daniel. Isn't that what matters? Happiness is one thing," Daniel pressed, voice low. "But people don't just show up out of nowhere. There's something off about him. You don't see it because you don't want to." She turned, her eyes pleading. "I've been alone a long time. For once I feel alive again. Can't you let me have that?" Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to protect her, to shake her from what he feared was a dangerous illusion, but the softness in her voice silenced him. He swallowed his warning, though it burned on his tongue. From the yard came Marcus's laughter, loud and easy, echoing like a performance for unseen eyes. Daniel glanced toward the window and felt a chill creep under his skin. He didn't know what Marcus was hiding, but he was sure something lay beneath the charm. That evening, as Eleanor and Marcus prepared to leave for a short honeymoon, Daniel stood at the curb, watching them drive away. Eleanor leaned out the window, waving, her joy unshaken. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, a faint smirk curling as if he knew Daniel was still watching. The car disappeared down the street, leaving Daniel in silence. The unease inside him deepened, no longer just suspicion, but something heavier, an instinct he could not ignore. The cabin sat tucked away at the edge of the lake, its windows glowing gold as the sun slipped beneath the horizon. Eleanor breathed in the crisp evening air, the weight of the past few days lifting as she stepped onto the porch. This was what Marcus had promised: quiet escape, a chance to savor the beginning of their life together. Inside, Marcus set down a bottle of wine and loosened his tie. "Not bad for a honeymoon hideaway, huh?" he asked, flashing that practiced grin. Eleanor smiled, letting her fingers trace the wooden frame of the doorway. "It's perfect. Feels like a dream." He poured 2 glasses, handing one to her before settling beside her on the porch swing. The lake shimmered with the last threads of daylight, and for a moment, Eleanor let herself believe. She closed her eyes, imagining mornings filled with laughter, evenings by the fire, and no more empty nights alone. But as she leaned against Marcus's shoulder, she felt the subtle stiffness in his body, as if his thoughts were already elsewhere. "You've been quiet today," she said gently. Marcus took a long sip of wine before answering. "Just thinking about the future. There's so much we can do together, Eleanor. New places, new opportunities. We could start fresh, build something big." His tone carried excitement, yet the words seemed more rehearsed than heartfelt. Eleanor laughed softly. "At my age, I'm just looking for peace. I don't need big, I just need us." Marcus turned, his hand brushing hers. "And you'll have that, but imagine your house could sell for a good price. With the money we could invest, maybe move somewhere warmer, somewhere no one knows us." The suggestion unsettled her. She looked at him closely, trying to read his face in the fading light. His eyes glimmered, but not with tenderness. Something sharper lurked there. "I've lived in that house for 30 years, Eleanor said carefully. "It holds memories of my parents, of Daniel growing up. I can't just leave it all behind." Marcus forced a smile, but his jaw tightened. Of course. Just ideas, you know. I want us to have options." Eleanor sipped her wine, hiding the flicker of doubt that stirred inside her. She wanted to believe in the picture he painted, but the urgency in his tone pricked at her heart. The sky deepened into violet, the lake turning to glass. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the creak of the swing. Marcus tapped his fingers against the armrest, restless, as though waiting for something Eleanor couldn't see. She reached for his hand, hoping to anchor him. "Marcus, I just want you. That's all I've ever wanted." For a brief second, his features softened. He kissed her temple, whispering, "And you'll always have me." The words should have comforted her, yet they carried an edge she couldn't explain. As the stars appeared overhead, Eleanor clung to the warmth of his embrace, pushing away the unease growing inside her. She told herself love was always imperfect, that every marriage began with adjustments. But deep down a small voice whispered that some promises were made not to heal, but to bind. The cabin creaked in the stillness of midnight, the wind rattling the trees outside. Eleanor stirred beneath the quilt, reaching for Marcus's warmth, but her hand met only the cool indentation where he had been. Her eyes blinked open to the dark, confusion tightening in her chest. She whispered his name once, then louder. "Marcus?" Silence answered. She slipped from the bed, pulling her robe around her. The floorboards groaned beneath her steps as she checked the bathroom empty. The kitchen empty. Through the window, a faint glow caught her eye. Marcus stood outside near the tray line, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low, urgent. Eleanor pressed her hand against the glass. Watching, his tone wasn't tender or casual. It was clipped, commanding, like a man giving orders. Her breath quickened, and though she strained, she couldn't make out the words. When the door creaked open, Marcus stepped inside, slipping the phone into his pocket. He startled slightly when he saw her standing there. "You're awake?" he said, smoothing his voice into calm. "I reached for you, and you weren't there." "Couldn't sleep. Needed air," he replied too quickly. "Nothing to worry about." Eleanor searched his face, but his eyes avoided hers, lingering instead on the glass of water he poured at the sink. "Who were you talking to?" she asked quietly. His hand froze on the counter for just a second before he chuckled. "A friend. Just checking in. You know how people worry." "A friend?" Her voice cracked slightly. He turned, smiling too broadly. "Eleanor, you're my wife now. Do you think I'd be out here doing something to hurt that?" She forced a nod, though unease crawled across her skin. I don't know you when you sound like that." Marcus closed the distance, cupping her cheek. "I'm here with you. That's what matters." His hand was warm, steady, but his eyes carried something distant, unreachable. Eleanor leaned into his touch anyway, desperate to hold on to the man she thought she had married. Later, when they returned to bed, Marcus fell asleep instantly, his breathing heavy, untroubled. Eleanor lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The image of him in the dark, whispering to someone unseen, replayed over and over. She told herself it was nothing, that she was letting fear taint her happiness. But as she finally closed her eyes, she felt a hollowness between them, like a wall had risen in only 3 days of marriage. And in the silence, she wondered whether the man she lay beside was ever truly hers. The next morning began with sunlight filtering through thin curtains, but the warmth did little to ease the heaviness between Eleanor and Marcus. He kissed her cheek in greeting, yet the gesture felt mechanical, as though his lips carried no intention. Over breakfast, Eleanor tried to draw him out. "We should go down to the lake later," she suggested, buttering toast with a hopeful smile. "Maybe rent one of those little boats. It would be nice." Marcus scrolled his phone, eyes flicking across the screen. "We'll see," he muttered, his attention already gone. The dismissal stung. She pressed her lips together, folding the suggestion into silence. As the day unfolded, Marcus spent long stretches outside, phone pressed to his ear, pacing along the porch. Eleanor lingered at the window, watching his expression harden, soften, then harden again. Whoever he was speaking to, his voice carried intimacy, not the kind meant for her. That evening, when she asked who it was, Marcus waved her off. "Just a buddy," he said, irritation creeping into his tone. "Don't start making it into something it's not." She wanted to believe him, but the coldness in his eyes deepened with each passing hour. The second night came with silence so heavy it pressed against Eleanor's chest. Marcus lay in bed, back turned, his phone screen glowing faintly, until he tucked it beneath the pillow. Eleanor reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm. He shifted away without a word. She lay awake, tears stinging her eyes, wondering if she had mistaken loneliness for love, if her desperation for companionship had blinded her to the truth. On the third day, Eleanor tried again. She dressed in a soft blue blouse, styled her hair, and prepared his favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary. When he entered, she greeted him with a hopeful smile. "Dinner's ready. I thought we could sit together. Just us. No phones tonight." Marcus sat, chewing mechanically, barely looking at her. After a few bites, he pushed the plate aside, muttering, "Not hungry." Her chest tightened. Marcus, please talk to me. You've been distant since we got here. Did I do something wrong? He leaned back, arms folded. You're overthinking. I just need space. Is that too much to ask? Her voice cracked. We're newly married. Shouldn't this be the time we're closest? Marcus's jaw tightened. I said I need space. The words cut deeper than she expected. Eleanor lowered her gaze, her appetite gone. She sat in silence as Marcus rose from the table and left the room, his footsteps heavy against the wood. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling as Marcus typed on his phone in the dark. Every vibration, every faint chuckle tore at her. She wanted to ask who he was speaking to, but fear clenched her throat. If she asked, she might hear an answer she couldn't bear. 3 days of love, 3 nights of silence. That was their marriage so far, a fragile illusion already unraveling. As dawn approached, Eleanor realized with a hollow ache that the man she had married was slipping beyond her reach, and she didn't know how to pull him back. The cabin seemed to breathe with tension that evening, its walls heavy with unspoken words. A storm gathered outside, the wind sweeping across the lake and rattling the shutters. Inside, Eleanor moved cautiously, preparing tea as Marcus sat on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. She set the cups on the table, her voice trembling slightly. Marcus, can we talk? He didn't look up. About what? Us, she whispered. I don't understand what's happening. 3 days and already you're a stranger to me. His thumb flicked across the screen. You're imagining things. No, Eleanor pressed, her chest tight. I hear you on the phone at night. You turn away from me. Her voice faltered, but she forced the words out. Who are you talking to? Marcus finally lowered the phone, his expression flat, unreadable. I told you, a friend. A friend doesn't keep you up all night, she snapped, surprising herself with the sharpness of her tone. A friend doesn't pull you away on our honeymoon. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Marcus's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something darker crossing his face. You think you can question me? He said slowly, rising from the couch. After everything I gave up to be here with you? Eleanor backed a step. I just want honesty. I deserve that much. He moved closer, his presence towering. What you deserve is to stop pushing. I don't owe you an explanation for every call, every move I make. Her heart pounded. I'm your wife. Exactly, he hissed, his voice low, dangerous. And that means you trust me, whether you like it or not. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating his face for a fleeting second. Hard, twisted, stripped of the charm he wore so easily in front of others. Eleanor's breath caught. For the first time she saw him not as the man she loved, but as something else entirely. Cold, calculating, unyielding. She whispered, Who are you really, Marcus? The words snapped something inside him. He slammed his fist against the wall, the picture frame rattling. Enough, he shouted, his voice booming over the storm. Eleanor flinched, stumbling back toward the table. Her teacup toppled, shattering against the floor. The sharp sound sliced through the room, echoing like a warning. Marcus stepped forward, grabbing her arm with a force that made her cry out. His grip burned, fingers digging into her skin. You don't get to question me, he growled. Tears blurred her vision. Let go, please. But his grip tightened, his face hovered inches from hers, his eyes burning with something unrecognizable. You wanted the truth? His voice dripped with venom. The truth is you were convenient. You were desperate. And I knew exactly how to play you. The words pierced deeper than any wound. Eleanor's knees weakened, her body trembling as the realization crashed over her. She tried to pull free, but Marcus shoved her back against the wall. Pain shot through her shoulder. She gasped. The air knocked from her lungs. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the windows, as if the world itself bore witness. Eleanor struggled, her voice breaking. Daniel was right about you. Marcus's expression twisted with rage. He raised his hand, the moment stretching into unbearable silence. For an instant, Eleanor thought it would end there, that his rage would spill into something irreversible. But then a neighbor's dog barked in the distance, sharp and insistent. Marcus froze, his chest heaving. Slowly, he lowered his hand, his grip loosening just enough for Eleanor to stagger free. She pressed against the wall, clutching her bruised arm, tears streaming. Marcus turned away, pacing, muttering under his breath. The storm thundered, drowning his words, but Eleanor heard enough. She'll ruin everything if she doesn't keep quiet. Her heart raced. The man she had married 3 days ago was no longer her salvation, but her greatest threat. And as the storm beat against the cabin, she realized her nightmare had only begun. The storm had not eased by morning. Rain still hammered the cabin roof, a relentless percussion that mirrored Eleanor's racing heart. She sat at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of untouched coffee, her arm bruised where Marcus had gripped her. Marcus moved about the room as though nothing had happened, humming faintly, his shirt freshly pressed. The contrast made Eleanor's skin crawl. "Last night," she began carefully, "we can't just pretend it didn't happen." He turned, eyes sharp. "Then don't bring it up again." Her throat tightened. The mask was gone. Only cruelty remained. By afternoon, another argument erupted. Eleanor found the courage to say what she had buried for days. "If this is who you are, Marcus, I can't live like this." His smile turned cold. "You think you get to decide that?" The fight escalated. Words collided with the crash of thunder outside, voices rising until Marcus's hand struck the table, rattling dishes. Eleanor tried to step away, but he caught her wrist again, dragging her close. "Let me go," she screamed, twisting free, stumbling back into the counter. Her elbow struck a glass, sending it shattering across the floor. The sound drew the attention of neighbors across the lake. One, a retired schoolteacher, opened her porch door and paused, straining to hear over the storm. Inside the cabin, chaos reigned. Marcus's anger boiled over. He shoved Eleanor, and she fell hard against the wall. Pain seared her side as her head struck the frame. Blood smeared across the white paint in a streak that glistened under the dim light. Eleanor gasped, disoriented, her vision swimming. The copper tang filled her mouth. She tried to crawl away, fingers trembling against the floorboards. Marcus froze, chest heaving, staring at the red on his hands and the wall. For the first time there was no grin, no charm, only a flicker of panic. From outside came muffled voices. The neighbor called to her husband, saying she'd heard something. Another dog barked, sharp and insistent. Marcus cursed under his breath. He grabbed a towel, pressing it against the wall in a futile attempt to erase the evidence. Eleanor coughed, her voice weak. "Someone will find out. They'll know." His eyes darted toward her, calculating. "Cold," he whispered. "Not if you keep quiet." But already the world outside the cabin was stirring. The neighbors, unsettled by the commotion, reached for the phone. Eleanor, dazed and bleeding, clutched the floorboards, praying someone would come before it was too late. The knock on the cabin door came minutes after the shouting ceased. Heavy, deliberate, Marcus stiffened, his shirt damp with sweat, towel still clutched in his hand. Eleanor, slumped near the wall, tried to call out, but only a broken gasp escaped her lips. "Mr. Reed, Mrs. Hayes?" A voice called through the rain. "Sheriff's Department. We got a call from neighbors." Marcus's jaw clenched. He dropped the towel, muttered a curse, then forced his face into calm. He opened the door, rain sweeping in with the deputies. "Evening," he said smoothly, though his tone strained. "Sorry if the storm made things sound worse than they were." Deputy Clark stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze stopped at the shards of glass on the floor, then at Eleanor, who struggled to sit upright, her temples streaked with blood. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Clark asked, moving quickly to her side. Marcus cut in. "She tripped, hit the wall. I was just about to get her to a hospital." Eleanor opened her mouth, but Marcus's hand brushed her shoulder, light to the deputies, a warning to her. Fear tightened her chest. She forced a shaky nod. It was an accident," Clark frowned, unconvinced. He turned to his partner, Deputy Ruiz. "Get the medic kit from the truck." While Ruiz stepped out, Clark crouched beside Eleanor. "Ma'am, you're hurt bad. We'll get you checked out." Marcus hovered, his smile stiff. "I'll take care of her." Clark stood, meeting his eyes. We'll be the judge of that. Eleanor was escorted to the ambulance, rain soaking her gown, her vision blurring. As paramedics cleaned the wound, Clark lingered, his instincts gnawing. The cabin smelled of iron, sharp and undeniable. On the wall behind the couch, a faint smear of blood had been hastily wiped, but not enough. Back at the cruiser, Ruiz returned. Neighbors said they heard screaming. Sounded like a fight. Clark exhaled. Doesn't look like just a fall, does it? Ruiz shook his head. Not at all. At the hospital, Daniel arrived within the hour, his face pale as he rushed into the ER waiting room. Seeing his mother bandaged and trembling ignited a fire inside him. He turned on Marcus, who leaned against the wall with practiced indifference. What did you do to her? Daniel demanded, his voice breaking. Marcus lifted his hands. Easy. She slipped. Ask her yourself. Eleanor, lying on the bed, met her son's eyes. For a moment, truth sat heavy on her tongue, but Marcus's gaze lingered from the doorway, cold and sharp. She faltered. It was an accident, she whispered. Daniel's fists clenched. He didn't believe it. Not for a second. Detectives were called in the next morning. Photos of the cabin were taken, the broken glass, the smears on the wall, the blood-soaked towels stuffed behind the sink. Each piece chipped away at Marcus's story. Detective Harris, seasoned and unflinching, studied the evidence. This wasn't an accident, he said. This was violence. Back at Eleanor's bedside, Clark asked gently, Mom, do you feel safe with him? Her lips trembled, words caught between fear and the need for protection. She whispered only, I don't know. But Daniel knew. His mother's silence screamed louder than any words. And as he looked at Marcus, whose charm never wavered even under suspicion, Daniel vowed he wouldn't rest until the truth was dragged into the light. Detective Harris leaned back in his chair. The crime scene photos spread across the table. The blood on the wall, the bruises on Eleanor's arm, the neighbors' statements. It all pointed in one direction. But Marcus Reed remained maddeningly composed, insisting on the same story. Accident, misunderstanding, nothing more. Harris tapped his pen against the file. Men like him don't just snap out of nowhere, he muttered. There's always a trail. That trail began with Marcus's phone records. Subpoenaed within days, they revealed hours of late-night calls to a number Eleanor didn't recognize. Dozens of messages, coded and hurried. One name surfaced again and again, Vanessa. Detectives tracked her down to a small apartment on the city's east side. 27, striking with a guarded expression that cracked when she saw the badge. I don't know why you're here, she said quickly, folding her arms. Harris set the photo of Marcus on the table. You know him. Vanessa's breath hitched before she forced a scoff. Maybe. So what? Harris leaned in. He's married. 3 days ago. You knew that. The color drained from her face. She sank into the chair, her voice trembling. He said it was a scam. That the woman was lonely and he'd get money out of her, then leave. He promised me we'd have enough to start fresh. The room went still. Harris's jaw tightened, Ruiz jotting notes furiously. Did he ever say what he'd do if she found out? Harris asked. Vanessa hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the door, as though Marcus might appear at any moment. He said, she wouldn't be a problem for long. The words landed heavy. The confirmation Harris needed. Back at the station, Daniel was told of Vanessa's testimony. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. He was going to kill her. My mother. And she still defends him. Harris placed a steady hand on his shoulder. We'll get him, Daniel. But we need Eleanor's voice in this. Until she admits what happened, it's her word against his. That evening, Vanessa agreed to hand over the messages Marcus had sent. Each one painted the same picture, promises of wealth, hatred toward Eleanor, impatience for her exit. One message chilled Harris the most. 3 days. Then it's ours. 3 days. The length of his marriage. At the hospital, Eleanor sat by the window, her bandages stark against her pale skin. Daniel entered quietly, the detectives behind him. Mom, he said softly, they found her. The woman Marcus has been calling, Vanessa. Eleanor's head turned slowly. Her lips parted, but no words came. They have proof, Daniel continued, his voice breaking. He used you. He never loved you. Please, you have to see it. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, the truth crashing down in waves she had tried so hard to resist. Her silence was answer enough. Detective Harris spread a stack of documents across the table, each folder stamped with different county seals. Ruiz leaned over, scanning the names, the addresses, the familiar pattern emerging like a stain no one had noticed until now. 3 women in 5 years, Harris said grimly. All older, all with something he wanted. The first file was Margaret Lane, 62, a retired nurse. She had met Marcus through a dating website. Within months, she had sold a portion of her property, transferring a sizable sum into a joint account with him. Not long after, the relationship ended abruptly. Margaret claimed Marcus lost interest, but neighbors recalled shouting late at night, doors slamming, a sense of dread hanging over the house. Next came Joanna Clark, 58, a businesswoman who had briefly made headlines for filing bankruptcy. In her statement, she insisted Marcus was a conman who drained her accounts and left her in ruins. No charges had ever been filed. Marcus vanished before investigators pieced the story together. Finally, Linda McAllister, 64. She was found unconscious in her home after a supposed fall down the stairs. Marcus had been living with her at the time, but disappeared within hours of the ambulance arriving. Linda later recovered, but she refused to press charges, claiming she had no proof. Ruiz shook his head, disgusted. He's a predator. He picks women who are vulnerable, lonely, maybe too proud to admit they were fooled. He bleeds them dry and moves on before anyone can stop him. Harris tapped a finger on the table. Until Eleanor. This time he slipped. The detectives compiled their findings into a thick dossier. Each page added weight to the case: financial records, witness statements, scraps of phone logs from years past. Together they formed a chilling portrait. Marcus Reed was not simply charming. He was calculated, patient, dangerous. At the hospital, Daniel sat with his mother as Harris laid the file on the bedside table. Eleanor hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Hayes," Harris said gently, "you need to see who he really is." She turned the first page, her eyes scanning the photographs. Women smiling, women broken, women lost in the aftermath of Marcus's betrayal. Eleanor's breath hitched as she whispered their names. Margaret, Joanna, Linda. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "He's done this before. I wasn't the first." "No," Harris said quietly, "but you can make sure you're the last." Daniel's voice was raw. "Mum, please, don't protect him anymore. Look what he's done to you. Look what he planned." Eleanor closed the folder slowly, pressing it against her chest as though to shield herself from the weight of it all. Her silence stretched long, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the monitor beside her. "Finally," she whispered, "he promised me love, and I let myself believe it." Daniel squeezed her hand, his own eyes burning. "He never loved you, Mom, but I do, and I won't let him hurt you again." Outside the hospital room, Harris met Ruiz's gaze. They both knew Eleanor's voice was the key. The evidence was damning, but without her testimony, Marcus would weave his lies, just as he had before. For the first time, though, the trail of shadows behind him was fully illuminated. And this time, he would not escape into the dark. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady hum of machines. Eleanor sat propped against the pillows, her face pale, her arm wrapped in bandages. The bruises had begun to darken into deep purples and blues, each mark a reminder she could not escape. Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting gently over hers. He tried to smile, but the grief in his eyes betrayed him. "You don't have to go through this alone, Mum," he whispered. Eleanor turned her gaze toward the window, where rain streaked the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, older, fragile, a woman she barely recognized. "I thought I'd found a reason to live again," she said softly. "Now I don't even know who I am." Daniel squeezed her hand. "You're my mother. You're the woman who raised me when Dad left. You've always been stronger than you know." Her throat tightened. "Strong?" She lifted her bandaged arm slightly, wincing at the pain. "I let him walk into my life, my home, my heart. I gave him everything, and he gave me this." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her free hand against her face, her body shaking. For years loneliness had wrapped around her like a shroud, and Marcus had torn through it with promises of love, of belonging. She had wanted so badly to believe. "Mom," Daniel said gently, "he manipulated you. That's not weakness. That's him. That's what he does." Eleanor lowered her hand, meeting her son's eyes. "But I should have seen it. The signs were there, the way he looked at me sometimes, like I was a means to an end. I ignored it, because I didn't want to lose him. I thought if I just loved him enough, it would be real." Daniel shook his head. "You deserve better than real love that has to be earned like that. You deserve love that's given freely." His words pierced the fog in her chest, but the shame remained heavy. She thought of the women in Harris's file, Margaret, Joanna, Linda, all of them left scarred in different ways. Now she carried her own scars, etched on her skin and carved into her heart. The nurse entered briefly to check her vitals, leaving behind the faint scent of antiseptic. Eleanor closed her eyes, her body weary. "I don't know if I can face a courtroom, Daniel. I don't know if I can sit there and look at him again." Daniel's voice was steady, though his hands trembled. "You don't have to do it alone. I'll be there every step. And if you can't do it for yourself, then do it for the women who never got the chance. Do it for me." Eleanor's chest rose with a shaky breath. Pain lingered in every bone, but beneath it a fragile seed of resolve began to take root. Marcus Reed did not wait for the law to catch up with him. By the time detectives finalized the hospital interviews, he was already gone, leaving behind a half-packed duffel and a trail of lies. His absence was discovered at dawn, when officers arrived at the cabin with a warrant. The front door hung ajar, curtains drawn back, and the place smelled faintly of bleach. Detective Harris crouched near the sink, where rags still dripped with diluted cleaner. "He knew we were coming," he muttered. Ruiz scanned the empty drawers, the closet stripped bare. "Then he's running. And men like him, they always think they're smarter than the chase." By noon, Marcus's car was found abandoned near the highway. Inside were fast food wrappers, a cheap prepaid phone, and Eleanor's missing jewelry box, emptied of its contents. The manhunt stretched across state lines. Marcus slipped into bus stations and motels, paying in cash, changing his appearance with a trim of his beard, a pair of tinted glasses. Each disguise bought him hours, never more. Witnesses remembered his smile, the charm that made strangers lower their guard. But charm alone couldn't erase his trail. Surveillance cameras caught glimpses: Marcus at a gas station in Alabama, Marcus buying a bus ticket in Mississippi. Each image fed the urgency of the chase, his arrogance betraying him with every move. At the command center, Harris traced the pins on the map. "He's heading south, probably thinks he can get out by the coast, maybe a boat." Rios nodded grimly. "Or maybe he's running to someone. He's too reckless to go alone." That lead cracked open when Vanessa, still trembling from her interviews, admitted Marcus had once spoken about a friend near the Gulf who could make things disappear. Armed with the new lled, federal marshals joined the hunt. Meanwhile, Marcus's mask began to slip. Days on the run etched tension into his features. He snapped at clerks, kept his head down, slept in his car. Hunger clawed at him. Paranoia gnawed at every shadow. He called Vanessa once, from a burner phone. "Did you tell them?" he demanded. Her silence was answer enough. He cursed, slamming the phone shut. Back in Willow Creek, Eleanor lay awake, haunted by the thought of him still free. Every creak of the hospital at night sent shivers down her spine. Daniel sat by her bed, assuring her the police would find him, but in his own heart he feared Marcus's reach was longer than anyone knew. On the 5th day of the hunt, deputies closed in on a seedy motel near the Louisiana border. A tip from a clerk had confirmed a man matching Marcus's description, checked in under a false name. Harris coordinated the takedown, his voice sharp over the radio. "We do this clean. No mistakes. He's dangerous." The sun was sinking when the team surrounded the building. Doors burst open, boots thundered against the pavement. Inside room 14, Marcus jolted awake, a pistol half drawn from beneath the mattress. His eyes widened as the red beams of rifles lit the walls. For the first time, fear cracked through his practiced confidence. "Marcus Reed," Harris's voice roared. "Don't move." For a tense moment, the room held its breath. Marcus's finger twitched near the trigger, his eyes darting to the window, but the weight of armed officers pressed in from every side. Slowly, with a curse, he dropped the gun. The chase was over, but the reckoning was only beginning. The interrogation room was stark, its single bulb humming above the table where Marcus sat, wrists bound in steel cuffs. He leaned back in the chair with the ease of a man at a bar, not a fugitive cornered after days on the run. Detective Harris entered, dropping a folder thick with photographs onto the table. The images spilled across the metal surface. Eleanor's bloodied face, the bruises on her arms, the smeared wall at the cabin. Marcus's eyes flicked over them without so much as a blink. "You did this," Harris said flatly. Marcus smirked. "She fell. I told you already. She's clumsy." Harris leaned forward, his knuckles pressing into the table. 3 days into your marriage, and she ends up in a hospital bed. That's not clumsy, Marcus. That's you. Marcus's grin widened, almost playful. Maybe she should have known better than to believe fairy tales at her age. The words cut through the room like ice. Harris swallowed his anger, sliding another photo forward. This time it wasn't Eleanor. It was Margaret Lane smiling beside Marcus in an old snapshot. Then Joanna Clark. Then Linda McAllister, victims of his charm, his greed, his violence. "Recognize them?" Harris asked. Marcus tilted his head, feigning thought. Faces blur after a while. Older women, lonely hearts. They all want the same thing. And I was generous enough to give it to them, for a price. The casual cruelty in his tone made Ruiz, watching from the corner, shift uncomfortably. Harris's voice hardened. "Vanessa gave us everything. The messages, the plan. You thought Eleanor wouldn't last more than 3 days. You promised her death was your ticket to a new life." For the first time, Marcus's smirk faltered. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing at the name. But the break in composure lasted only seconds before he leaned back, chuckling. "Women talk too much. You'll never pin this on me." "You're wrong," Harris said. "This time, we have more than whispers. We have blood, bruises, witnesses, a trail of your shadows. And Eleanor, she's finding her voice." Marcus's eyes darkened, the mask slipping just enough to reveal the fury beneath. "She wouldn't dare." Harris stared at him unflinching. "She already has." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with Marcus's barely contained rage. He shifted in his chair, the cuffs rattling, but said nothing more. When Harris and Ruiz stepped out, Ruiz exhaled sharply. Cold as stone. No remorse. He'd do it again if he had the chance. Harris nodded grimly. "That's why we make sure he never does." Behind the glass, Marcus sat alone, his smile fading into something darker. In the harsh fluorescent light, stripped of charm and shadow, he looked less like a husband and more like what he truly was, a predator finally caught in the open. The courthouse buzzed with hushed voices as reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing at every arrival. Inside, the air was tense, every seat filled with townspeople drawn by the spectacle. A 55-year-old woman betrayed, a 30-year-old husband accused. No one could look away. Eleanor sat near the front, her posture rigid, a scarf pulled carefully to cover the fading bruise along her neck. Daniel sat beside her, his hand steady on hers, though she could feel the tremor in his grip. When Marcus entered, escorted by deputies, the room fell into uneasy silence. He wore a tailored suit, his hair neatly combed, his charm reconstructed like armor. His eyes swept the room, resting on Eleanor only briefly before he leaned toward his lawyer with a smirk. The prosecution began by painting the picture of a calculated predator. Photographs of Eleanor's injuries were displayed, medical records detailed, neighbors testified about screams during the storm, the blood on the wall, the calls to police. Each piece stacked against Marcus, a wall of evidence that seemed insurmountable. But when the defense rose, the air shifted. Marcus's attorney spoke with smooth confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, This case is not about violence, it's about perception. A lonely woman, desperate for affection, misinterpreted a marital disagreement. Eleanor Hayes is not a victim of assault. She is a woman embarrassed by choices she regrets, seeking to rewrite the story of her failed marriage. Eleanor's chest tightened. She wanted to cry out, to protest, but the weight of the courtroom silenced her. Vanessa was called next. She took the stand with trembling hands, recounting the late-night calls, the promises Marcus had made, the chilling message, 3 days, then it's ours. The defense pounced. Miss Torres, isn't it true you were romantically involved with Mr. Reed? That you were angry when he married another woman? Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I was involved, but that doesn't change the truth. He told me Eleanor was just a means to an end. The courtroom rippled with shock. Then it was Daniel's turn. He took the stand, voice tight with emotion. I watched my mother fade in front of him. I saw the way he looked at her, like she was a prize he'd already claimed. I begged her to see through it, but she wanted to believe in love, and now she bears the scars of that belief. Marcus leaned forward, smirking, as if the testimony amused him. His lawyer objected, claiming Daniel's account was biased, born of dislike for his stepfather. Finally, Eleanor was called. She walked slowly to the stand, her legs trembling, her throat dry. The courtroom fell into silence. Mrs. Hayes, the prosecutor asked softly, did Marcus Reed harm you? Her eyes met Marcus's across the room. His stare was cold, daring her to speak. For a moment fear threatened to choke her, but then she felt Daniel's gaze behind her, steady, urging her forward. Her voice broke, but did not falter. Yes, he hurt me, he betrayed me, and he would have killed me if no one had come. The room erupted. Reporters scribbled. Jurors shifted. The truth finally spoken aloud. Marcus's mask cracked, fury flashing in his eyes, but the courtroom doors had already closed around him. The story was no longer his to twist. The jury filed back into the courtroom after hours of deliberation, their expressions guarded, unreadable. The weight of their decision seemed to press on every corner of the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Eleanor's hands clutched Daniel's, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. Marcus sat at the defense table with the same smug composure he had worn since the trial began. His suit was immaculate, his hair slicked back, the picture of confidence. He whispered something to his lawyer, then leaned back, as though the outcome was already decided in his favor. All rise, the bailiff commanded as the judge entered. The room fell silent. The foreman stood, a folded slip of paper in his hand. The judge's voice was steady. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreman unfolded the paper, cleared his throat, and read aloud. On the charge of attempted murder, we find the defendant, Marcus Reed, guilty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Eleanor's breath caught, tears springing to her eyes. Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, whispering, It's over, Mum. He can't hurt you anymore. But at the defense table, Marcus's mask finally cracked. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, rage flashing, as deputies moved to restrain him. He leaned toward Eleanor, his voice low but venomous. This isn't the end. You'll regret crossing me. The deputies pulled him back before the words could sink further, but Eleanor shuddered. His threat clung to her, heavy and poisonous, even as the gavel struck. The judge's voice cut through the chaos. Marcus Reed, you are hereby remanded into custody, pending sentencing. Court is adjourned. The room erupted in sound, reporters rushing for the exits, whispers swirling like wildfire. Eleanor sat frozen, her tears blurring the room. Guilty. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and final, yet strangely hollow. Outside the courthouse, microphones and cameras awaited. Daniel shielded his mother, guiding her past the throng. Reporters shouted questions. Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you believe justice has been served? Eleanor kept her head low, her scarf pulled tight. Justice. The word felt complicated. Yes, Marcus was guilty. Yes, he would be locked away. But the scars he left on her body, on her heart, were not erased by a verdict. In the car, Daniel held her hand, his voice gentle. It's a victory, Mom. Don't let him take that from you. She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the courthouse in the distance. Behind those walls, Marcus had finally been unmasked. Yet the echo of his threat lingered, a reminder that even when the law declared him guilty, the wounds he inflicted were hers to carry. As the car drove away, Eleanor leaned against the window, the sun breaking through the clouds. A verdict had been reached, but her reckoning was far from over. Weeks passed before Eleanor stepped back into her home. The trial was over. Marcus awaited sentencing, and yet the silence inside the house weighed heavier than the courtroom ever had. The walls seemed to whisper reminders of laughter, of promises, of the night those promises shattered. Daniel followed her inside, carrying a small box of belongings from the hospital. "I can stay a few nights," he offered, his voice gentle. Eleanor shook her head. "You've done enough. You need rest too." He studied her face, reluctant, but finally kissed her cheek. "Call me if you need anything." When the door closed, the house swallowed her whole. Eleanor moved slowly from room to room, her fingers grazing furniture she had once dusted with Marcus beside her. The faint smell of his cologne lingered on a jacket he had left behind. She pressed it to her chest, then flung it into a corner, her breath breaking. At the mirror, she caught her reflection. The bruises had faded, but the woman staring back carried new scars etched not on skin but in her eyes. In the lines of her mouth, she whispered to herself, "You loved a lie." Later that evening, she sat at the kitchen table, tea cooling beside her. The folder Detective Harris had left lay unopened. She had promised to read it, to absorb every truth about Marcus's past, but she already knew enough. Still, her hands trembled as she pulled the file closer, turning the pages once more. Margaret, Joanna, Linda, and herself. 4 women bound not by choice, but by the same man's deception. She traced her finger over each photograph, her chest tightening. "I could have been the one who never survived," she thought. A sound outside drew her from the file. She moved to the window, heart racing. But it was only a car pulling into a neighbor's driveway. She let out a shaky laugh. Even in prison, Marcus haunted her. His voice still echoed in her memory. This isn't the end. At night, Eleanor sat awake in bed, listening to the quiet. Loneliness pressed in, the same loneliness that had made her vulnerable to Marcus in the first place. She remembered the way he first touched her hand, the way he spoke of futures bright with love. She wanted to erase those memories, but they clung stubbornly, woven into the fabric of her being. Daniel called the next morning. "How are you holding up?" She hesitated, then answered truthfully. "Some days I feel like I survived. Other days I feel like I'm still trapped in that cabin." "Give it time," he said softly. "Healing takes longer than scars to fade." After the call, Eleanor stepped onto the porch. The sun spilled across the lawn, warm on her skin. For the first time, she let the light touch her without fear. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'm still here." But inside, the house carried shadows. Love had once filled it, or something masquerading as love. Now it held echoes of lies, of betrayal, of the thin line between devotion and danger. Eleanor knew she could never return to who she was before Marcus Reed. Yet she also knew survival was its own kind of victory. She turned back toward the house, a fragile strength stirring in her chest. The echoes would remain, but so would she.